last week, I believe it was last week, we were discussing the rise of AI and how you had students using AI to take tests, but the tests themselves were made by the teachers using AI, and then the teachers were grading the AI test that the students took using AI, And so it was it didn't seem right what was happening. And so let's continue that discussion with sort of a dive into what education should be and what some states are doing to fix their education system. Shelby, tell us what Texas is up to.
Yeah, it's interesting, Roman. Even just as early as Wednesday of this week, we're seeing a big shift over in Texas with what they call the STAR exam. So what that is it's basically a year-end exam that students take to measure their progress. Here's the thing. There was a really interesting article that I read recently where a former teacher, multilingual teacher, she had been teaching in the area for over 10 years, and she noticed something really troubling, which is that no matter how much improvement she noticed over the course of the year for her students, the test scores stayed the same. And unfortunately, a lot of those test scores were not very good. So she decided to do a deep dive into what was actually happening. And what she found was that the test itself was basically designed such that no matter what, a portion of students fail. That's troubling, right? Mm-hmm. So what they call it is a norm reference test, and it's basically essentially follows a bell curve, right? So no matter what, there is going to be an adjustment such that the lower end of performing students will always do very poorly. Right? This has been peer reviewed. It's like a whole thing. And here's the biggest issue with that. Obviously, test scores, it determines where resources go with schools. It determines even teacher education accreditation programs, these types of things. Even actually, there's some interesting debate about housing prices in some of these areas that are related too. But overall, students are doing poorly. And in some cases, these tests are actually labeling swaths of neighborhoods as just failures. Right? That's a big problem. So this week, what's happening is the Texas State Legislature has officially decided to scrap this whole thing. And they're going to replace it with a 3-part exam. So it's a shorter test. It's going to be taken 3 times a year, right? Beginning, middle, and end. And hopefully, this is going to be a better reflective indicator of students' actual progress.
Okay, there's a lot to say there. There's a lot to unpack. One is, so when you mentioned the standardization of that test, is it the fact that the lower end students, they would have passed, they got a 70% on the test, but then because of the bell curve that wound up failing, or did they actually get a 30%?
It seems like, I assume the adjustments vary, but there are tactics that get used basically to match this score set, what comes back to the bell curve.
I was going to say almost the exact opposite thing almost happened in San Francisco. So the San Francisco School District wanted to make sure nobody failed. So they were about to implement, or at least pilot, something called equity grading. And what it would be is just basically rejigging what your ABCD means. So they were going to make it so that a C was 40%, a D 21%. So you would still pass, you would still get a D if you had 21%. So this was about to go through the San Francisco School District, and then there was revolt from parents, teachers on both sides of the aisle, and on Tuesday, a few days ago, they okay, we won't do that. I don't know if they paused it, gotten rid of it completely, but it's almost the opposite. Nobody's gonna fail.
How bad were the scores to start with that they decided to do this? That's my question. Because you see a few really, honestly, very sad examples, right? I think Chicago, I think Baltimore, there were a couple of examples of this where there are major statistics coming out where students of a particular grade, I think there was one particular school where students not one single student passed proficiency in math for 3 years running. Not one student in the 8th grade.
Obviously,
can you imagine
the
that?
tests are too difficult.
Well, obviously, there's not enough money flowing to those schools. We need to pour more money into those schools.
And that's the worst part. These same schools that are just the test scores are plummeting. They're receiving some of the hugest, most unbelievable amounts of funding.
Per student, right?
Yeah.
So my question is, why are they putting things on a curve? Why are they doing equity grading? Why not just you score? No, you get a score and it shows what you do. What's the harm in that?
That's a
don't
great
understand.
question.
I know, but I don't understand. Is there like a specific perspective that like these higher ups in the education community, you know, they figured out this is the right way to go? Like what is their thinking?
Well, I can kind of imagine on the bell curve thing, they're like, okay, maybe the tests, I mean, maybe it doesn't work with standardized tests that are given every year to everyone, but you can imagine, you know, when there's teachers in class, like, oh, that test was too easy, that test was too hard, you know, it wasn't a good measure of, you know, how the students are doing, so they put on a bell curve. But if you're going to do that for the entire state or, you know, the whole system, like no matter what, 10% of kids are going to fail, 20% of kids are going to get, you know, between 50 and 60, and only this many will ever get A's, no matter how good they are. It's just.
Well, this is why they need New York's Common Core,
right.
where we just take everyone's standard. Every test you take is like a state type test, and then you have your baseline there.
Well, that was going to be my next question. So you said that the alternative that they're implementing now is like 3 tests throughout the year. But it almost seems like to me, if I was a teacher in that circumstance, I would feel like my hands are getting like super tied because I was already teaching to a test, but now I'm teaching like to a test that's every, like a quarter, right? So it's like, I feel like I would have so little freedom to be able to teach. So I wonder if it's like a good thing or a bad thing.
That's the thing. A lot of these teachers, especially that one teacher that I mentioned who did her deep dive into this whole issue, she was talking about this. She was preparing her second graders for a test that doesn't get taken until the end of 3rd grade. You know what I mean? So it's like, I think the teaching to the test is going to be a problem no matter what, to an extent with standardized testing, but the goal, as I understand it, with this, you know, breakup, the 3 tests are going to be shorter. They're supposed to be a little bit less intense of an experience overall for the students, obviously. From the perspective of a student, right, if you know your entire academic performance for the year is hinging on one day, what happens if you wake up on the wrong side of the bed? You know, that's
Are they
a lot of stress
measuring, are
happening
they
there.
seeing the child's progress against themselves? Because I could see that being useful. Here was their baseline at the beginning, and they've improved, and, you know, they had a successful year versus, you know, like, is that part of it?
It seems to me like, well, okay, so here's the other thing. The test scores being flat, this is what inspired this teacher to do this research in the first place. She noticed this, I believe it was 2012 to 2021, the test scores were essentially flat. And part of the reason that spurred her on to look into this was because it wasn't accurately measuring a student's progress year on year.
Do they do any of this in New Zealand?
I have no idea. I mean, the tests in New Zealand are very different. I think that they are changing them a lot to accommodate for different students' needs. I mean, I will say straight up, I was a victim of certain standardized testing. It was a bit of a traumatic experience in my life, actually. It was when I was going from middle school to high school, and you know, you have the exam at the end of the year to determine which class they're going to put you in high school. And I'm dyslexic, and I get really stressed when there's a time crunch, and I just end up not being able to do anything. So out of about a 10-page test, I did like half of the first page. You know, I probably looked like a bit of an idiot. And sure enough, when I go to high school, I look around, I don't see anyone I know, but I see a lot of kids acting really crazy and really just clearly not keen to learn.
Drooling.
I won't go that far, but you know, I kind of looked around, and I had been in the top classes throughout middle school, and I was like, I feel this is not where I'm meant to be. So there might have been a couple of tears shed. And anyway, I asked the teacher, you know, is there any way we can look at my other tests from throughout the year? And fortunately, they took me to the dean's office, and they looked at, we have SATs in New Zealand, I believe you guys have them here too, and they looked at those tests, and they were just like, oh, okay, and just immediately moved me to the top class in the first year of high school. And I just thought, my goodness, you know, it really showed me that it was really, for whatever reason, that one test that they used to decide which class you were going to be in at high school. And I thought, if I had not have said anything, I probably just would have been left, you know, in that class. How many other students are in that kind of situation?
Why do you think your SATs were so much better than your results on this particular test?
Well, I think that there was less pressure because there wasn't so much writing on it, just from a purely perception point of view. Of course, they're also multi-choice as well, but I just remember having a lot more time and feeling a lot more calm when doing it. And I know these days especially, I mean, kids are reporting anxiety just like off the Richter scale. You know, we're obviously, I mean, I'm older Gen Z, but Gen Z and Alpha and the younger ones, I mean, more and more children are getting on anxiety medication, just so anxious. For whatever reason, there's obviously lots of factors, but lots of people do talk about the type of anxiety that comes from testing. For whatever reason, I know people just call us snowflakes, but I think that it just kind of gets to the heart of the issue of, you know, how are you measuring a child's success? Like, what does success look like? And I think that the way that things are being measured today are just, you know, completely out the window and don't look at a child's whole being. Like I was telling you guys, I was chatting to my granddad before I came on the show because I wanted to tell a story and, you know, get my facts straight there. And my granddad has such an interesting story. I mean, obviously he comes from a much older generation and he really struggled in school. If he could have been tested, he was probably would have been found to have been dyslexic like myself and like my father, but they didn't do testing back then. And he just struggled so much with reading and writing. You know, if you had to just looked at him on the basis of reading and writing, you would have thought that he was not a very intelligent child. But fortunately, his parents, seeing his other strengths, because he was so good with his hands, with making things, just a real like technical headspace, they enrolled him in a technical school at just 12 years old. So he was able to leave the equivalent of middle school, go to technical school where he could do woodwork, you know, technical drawing, mechanics, engineering, all sorts of things. And he just really, really thrived. And then later on, he got an apprenticeship, ultimately ended up starting his own business, became very, very successful, making tractor parts and all sorts of things for gondolas and ski lifts all throughout New Zealand. And he retired just after 50. And he was saying to me tonight that if it was not for that technical school, who knows where he would have been. You know, he was able to pay off his first home at 28 years old because he got that start at just 12 years old and it just shot him along. But those schools have completely gone. In New Zealand and in the US, especially for middle schoolers, you certainly cannot leave school at that age to do something hands-on. But we hear about the ADHD epidemic, especially in boys, and young boys not being able to sit still, they can't pay attention. But the thing is education has just become so word-based and computer-based at that as well. There's no room for hands and more integrative, you know, learning these days.
We're also living in a post-pandemic era where people's attention spans are not what they once were. I know that's a hot topic to talk about, but ultimately, you know, you take kids out of an environment, a structured, standard environment, which already perhaps has its pros and cons, for some years, right? And they're, you know, they get varying levels of experience and varying levels of education and structure during that time, and then you try and shove them back into the box. It's like, how effective is that really, you know?
And I think a conversation that isn't being had yet, but I imagine it will be, is we all see now across bipartisan lines and state lines the conversation around cell phones in school really coming to the forefront. But I'm really waiting for when is the conversation about computers in schools going to be had? Because in just such a short amount of time, computers have proliferated, even for children in elementary school. When I was in school, and I just went to a regular school in New Zealand, public school, our computer time was very, very limited. It was like a luxury, and we'd just like go and paint and play games. You know, it was kind of like a free time, fun thing to do. Obviously in high school, it got more. But in New Zealand nowadays, and I know it's the same in the States too, kids are required to have Chromebooks by like 8, 9 years old. They do so much work on the computer. But what is so interesting is it's reported that a lot of Silicon Valley tech executives and CEOs, they actually send their children to Waldorf schools or Rudolf Steiner schools. My sister went to a Rudolf Steiner school, and the philosophy is basically everything is hand-based. They call it head, heart, and hand. There's no computers. The children are not allowed on computers at all until high school, and only then it's just very limited for research. And you really have to wonder, you know, it's reported that Steve Jobs, you know, potentially Bill Gates, a lot of Google executives, the former CEO of YouTube, they all sent their children to Waldorf schools or schools that had very limited technology. Why, when they are the ones that are actually on the forefront of creating this technology? I mean, clearly they understand something that perhaps the rest of us haven't been able to figure out just yet, that, you know, getting off the screens, getting off the computers and doing hands-on learning, there's just something so fundamental about it to being human and to learning and just becoming a whole human. And you know what that does to your brain and your brain development, it's so crucial it seems, but we just aren't having that conversation yet.
Yeah, you know, what you were describing is so keen. Like, When I was in high school, I think I was my high school was either the first or the second high school in Ohio to give every student we got our own MacBooks to take home, and we were assigned it for the whole year. And at first I was like, wow, that's cool. I was just watching cartoons, playing games on it, as was every other kid during the class. The computer was up, but if you're sitting in the back of the class, you can see what everyone is doing. But what you said about the Silicon Valley insiders and the tech bros in regards to their kids, that's a really good data point, because I feel like if you go through school using computers, this is just my own kind of personal experience, then I guess you do learn in a certain sense how to use computers better, which is good. But on the other hand, if you don't use the computers in school, you're going to use them at home, you're going to use them elsewhere. I don't think you're missing out anything. But what you are missing out is, I feel like in your brain, there's a conflation of what the computer is. Because if you don't use a computer and your whole education process is like a process of cultivation of yourself, then you see the proper relationship of the computer as a tool.
Yeah.
The computer is your tool to get something done. But if the computer is just always with you all the time, it's almost like it's an extension of you, which I think is not correct. I think that's not the correct way to view it. And it seems like the people on the inside who are literally like the Silicon Valley bros who are making the apps, making the hardware and the software, they understand that, and they want their kids to have that separation so that they can cultivate themselves as humans and use the tools that are out there, rather than have this like weird mix where they don't know where they begin. Maybe that's a little bit too harsh. They don't know where they begin, but I feel like there is something to that.
I'm not sure that it is too harsh, because I recently heard something that really made me reflect, and now I'm going to project it onto here. But I heard that the reason why you don't want on TV to have advertising aimed at kids, you hear about that, like, oh, okay, well, it's not fair, they're not the purchasers, they're going to go whine to their parents or whatever it is. But actually the reason is, until a kid is a certain age, I think it was 8 or something like that, they can't distinguish between an advertisement and content, right? So they're getting basically propaganda, they can't make that distinction. So now imagine a computer, right? Like you said, you don't know where you end and the computer starts. You can imagine if that's your experience, from being a little kid, being given the phone or the screen to occupy you when mom and dad, can't, and then you're in school, like everything is mediated through that. Like it's almost, you see little kids and they know how, almost instinctively how to swipe, whereas, my mother can't, I had to teach her how to use a mouse.
Yeah.
So I do think, you're talking about the brain being fused with the machine. I actually think that when the wiring starts out early, something's happening.
No, just not to mention the fact that where is the content coming from? Obviously in schools, okay, fine, there's educational material, but in the case of, the kids swiping or, being entertained by whatever television show it is, like who is curating the content that is raising this generation?
Just as a caveat, the educational material among that is CNN Plus, just Grace.
I was going to say, just fundamentally though, I think that honestly, especially if you're using it from such a small child, it starts making you think like a computer. Because one of the things about being a human being that no computer can match is just the endless creativity and wisdom and inspiration that can come to you, right? All of these new ideas, all of these things that we're able to create, problems we're able to solve, but a computer is so binary. It's programmed to, you click this, you go here. You click this, you go here. You don't have a whole array of options. And I think when you're constantly using it, that's how you start thinking. And I don't think we fully understand yet the way that that has changed the human brain and how we think about the world. One could say that perhaps it has contributed to the extreme type of partisanship we see and polarization and just overall narrow-minded thinking that we see nowadays, because we're all thinking like computers. It's black or it's white. It's this or it's that. It's this way or it's that way.
Yeah, I think we're also, when you mention partisanship, we're also going down our own echo chambers. And the content that you engage with is content that, maybe your friends are going to engage with. It becomes that a generation is being formed based on the content that they're engaging with online. So they all have this common base. It used to be people would watch the same cartoons on Nickelodeon or something like that, or Cartoon Network, and they would have all these similar experiences where they can both quote SpongeBob or something like that, Looney Tunes, whatever it might be. But now they're getting overwhelmed by all this other stuff on social media. I know we talked about tech bros. I know Mark Zuckerberg doesn't let his kid use Meta. Meta product.
Steve Jobs didn't let his kids on iPads.
But there's a reason for that because there is a lot out there, and I don't know if it's just a binary where you're going from this to that. I think also kids are getting overwhelmed, and that's leading to a lot of anxiety issues and lack of focus.
I honestly think that whether it's testing, whether it's the type of content, whatever it is, I feel like the issues with education won't be fundamentally fixed until we get to the technology issue. Just a little anecdote. I mentioned before that my sister went to a Rudolf Steiner school. I went to a seminar once with one of their teachers, and this always stuck with me because they were talking about their philosophy, and they were basically saying that what they believe is that when you're doing something with your hands, and they do a lot of painting, a lot of knitting, a lot of sewing, planting, everything, and they integrate that into mathematics as well, surprisingly. But basically they believe it goes through you energetically as action, heart, brain, and that's how you learn. They said when you do something on a computer or play video games, it just goes action, brain. And it really completely affects your development and how you interact with the world and other people. And the example that the teacher gave is, look at how important touch is to a baby. If you just leave a baby in a crib and you don't touch it, we know that that stunts that child, that person for life. Their social skills, their learning skills, just their overall brain development. And they're basically saying that is the perfect example for why we believe doing things with your hands physically and creatively is so important. It's the most critical part of being a human being. And I think that until we come to fully understand that, we'll just keep seeing all of these issues again and again, just in different forms.
And then one final thing, when I was talking about the echo chambers and that sort of thing, this is, I don't know if it's been studied, but it also erases a lot of the regional differences between people. Because you see it on TikTok, people are almost losing their accents from the communities that they're from. Like you have people with the Boston accent, you have people who are from the South, but when everyone's put online and the most popular creators are from up north or from LA or something, you'll hear people from Chicago talking like Valley Girls because they're engaging, those young girls are engaging so much with what's going on in California or what's going on in Miami or what's going on in New York that they're not in tune with what's happening in their own communities. They're focused on what's happening in these big content hubs.
Roman, I know we got to wrap up. I'm going to slide in my comment that I didn't get to make a couple of weeks ago, which is hopeful. When we were talking about AI, I was going to say because of AI and all of the potential cheating that is going on, a number of schools are actually moving back to paper tests. They're getting away from the computers so that there's no chance of using AI. So if that continues, we may see less computers.
I like it. When I was in high school, we also used paper tests. One time I literally taped my notes to the person sitting in front of me. But that taught me creativity. It taught me how to create
problem solver.
Yeah, problem solving, right? It's a different type of lesson that I learned. Do I remember what's on that test? No, but I remember that I passed that test because of that reason. Thank you so much for joining. I think this was a great discussion. All right, I know exactly what you're thinking. That was a great clip you just watched. Now, if you're watching on YouTube, make sure to follow and also check out either these videos or maybe they're on this side. I don't know which side they're on, but we set it up. So these are the videos that YouTube is suggesting to you as the best ones that you'll probably like the most. So check them out, this side,